In autumn 1979, To the Manor Born, the BBC's star vehicle for Penelope Keith, landed into our living rooms and was an immediate hit.
I don't think any episode got under 20 to 22 million, which now is sort of unheard of.
It was so amazingly successful. Phenomenally successful.
Viewers took Audrey Forbes Hamilton to their hearts, sympathising with her reduced circumstances and delighting in her attempts to come to terms with the real world.
The whole fabric of society is becoming irreparably unstitched.
For a nation recovering from the winter of discontent, To the Manor Born was a reminder of a bygone era.
It had that delightful Englishness about it, which is both idiotic and fascinating.
It was firmly entrenched in the class system.
If somebody doesn't serve me in a minute, I'll help myself.
And took an affectionate view of countryside pursuits. But what gave it an edge over other comedies of the time was the will-they, won't-they relationship between Audrey Forbes Hamilton and the nouveau riche Richard de Vere.
And to us?
It seemed to capture the imagination of the entire country.
It was escapist romance with a big R.
The part of Audrey Forbes Hamilton practically cast itself. Penelope Keith's comedy career began in 1957 as a straight woman to Dick Emery in The Army Game, and she was soon putting herself about in action-adventure series like The Avengers.
I wasn't a young leading actress in the normal sense of the word, in as much as I was fairly plain.
Had to get that out of my system.
Which was lovely, which gave me a chance at a lot of different characters.
Hello, dependents.
However,
I'm home. Good evening.
Herr Braun, Bottle von Gelbstein.
Yes, that's nice.
In everything from the film Every Home Should Have One to Yorkshire TV's Kate, Penelope played it plain and tough. But then came her big breakthrough, Margot Ledbetter in The Good Life, directed by John Howard Davis.
That's it. Careful now.
All four of us always enjoyed it. We always laughed. And that was very much John's way. As well as being a great professional, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was the most enchanting man.
Future Good Life producer John Howard Davis played Oliver Twist in David Lean's film, but he achieved even greater fame by helping to bring Monty Python's Flying Circus, Steptoe and Son, and Fawlty Towers to the small screen. Making The Good Life, he saw Penelope Keith create a role from an extremely minor character.
Penny's part in the initial Good Life was a voice off and saying one line.
What is it? What's going on?
It's the goods. They're dancing in their goldfish pond.
But you could tell even from that, the determined authority of it, that she was going to be a central and pivotal character.
Hello, Maria. Yes, and Yuletide felicitations to you. Listen, Maria, I'll be as brief as possible. Absolute chaos. Jerry has chickenpox.
She developed this character very well indeed.
Come in. Oh, thank you.
The walk, the fashions, the authority.
Just as well I did check that order. I mean, do I look as though I drink milk stout?
We all thought that 4 series was enough. There were various overtures made to Paul and me to do a spin-off, and I said no quite firmly. I said, the reason these characters work is because they're juxtaposed. That's what makes them funny.
What was that for?
I shall miss you terribly.
So shall I.
Jerry.
Yes, I know.
What happened after The Good Life is I promised each and every one of them a series of their own. Dickie Briar's got Ever-Decreasing Circles. I persuaded Paul to do Yes Minister, and Felicity Kendall got Solo, and I couldn't find anything for Penny Keith. And desperately, for about 18 months, I looked around, couldn't find anything that was suitable. Wanted a kind of sexy Barbara Woodhouse part for her.
Writer Peter Spence had learnt his trade on the radio as comedy sketch writer for Roy Hudd. When Roy moved to television, Peter followed and sold sketches to Marty Kane and Lenny Bennett's TV shows. But he also had ideas about developing a character of his own.
Word got out that the BBC was looking for a vehicle for Penelope Keith. So I just responded to this, and the thing started really with her. I was writing a show for her.
I had been to a dinner party, and I met chap called Peter Spence, who said that he was a writer. And actors' ears always, a writer, your ears pop up immediately. And so he said he had a script. Could he send it to me? And I said, yes, of course. And he sent me a script for a pilot for radio to the Manor. It was very different from the one we all got to know.
When it came to coming up with a new character for her, I just really had to think of what she had been up to that point, which is the Margot Ledbetter character. All I did really was flip the coin round and looked at it from the other and say, what if this person was as grand as Margot Ledbetter pretended to be? The edge being that she had lost her husband, she'd lost her money.
I said to Peter how much I had enjoyed doing it, and I said, I think it would make rather good television. Would you mind if I sent it to John Howard Davis, who by this time was head of light entertainment at the BBC television?
And I listened to it and thought it was wonderful. And we decided to do it, so I stole it from the Wireless, much to their chagrin and disappointment.
No one had ever rung me up from television before, and here was I getting this call from the top man asking me to go in with a view to writing a sitcom for them. Came as a tremendous shock. And I remember being absolutely terrified in the first instance. It meant that I had to wear a suit and practice pretending I knew what I was doing.
Peter Spence had also been writing sketches for the pilot of Not the 9 O'Clock News, which had been commissioned by John Howard Davis.
I said, no, you don't want to do that. You really want to write sitcom because A, there's more money in it, which was quite a good reason, and B, if you write sketch comedy, nobody will ever know what you have written.
I mean, he wasn't being demeaning of 9 O'Clock News, but he's saying I didn't want to be a sketch writer. And I remember thinking at the time, yes, actually, that's exactly what I want to be doing, because that's where my mates are and things.
He agreed after a little bit of persuasion. I said I'd break his legs otherwise.
Of course, I had no idea then that To the Manor was going to take off in the way it did. So I'm very grateful that I was forced to make that choice.
After persuading the writer to come on board, John Howard Davis handed over the job of producing and directing to Gareth Gwenlyn, his former assistant, who had worked on The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin and Butterflies, written by Carla Lane and starring Wendy Craig as Rhea.
He works well with women, Gareth, as well as men, but he has that particular talent that enables women to shine.
This is my latest unhappy experience.
His experience with Wendy Craig made Gareth Gwenlyn a perfect choice for working with a strong leading woman.
It is an apple sponge.
He also found himself having to nurture a writer new to television.
It became sort of clear to both John Howard and myself in the early days of the scripts coming in that while they were funny and while they were creating interesting characters, the structure of the pieces showed a naivety which needed some other help to put together.
They weren't very confident about me at the very beginning because I'd only worked in radio, I hadn't worked in television, although I'd done sketches for television up to that point.
Peter Spence was unusual in that he has an enormous amount of talent, but he wrote alone, and it's sometimes very difficult to write a situation comedy alone because you have no yardstick to go by. You don't know when you've written too much or too little, and so on and so forth. That's why Christopher Bond was brought in the first place, to help him as somebody to bounce off. They didn't actually write together, but what they did was enhance each other's work.
There were things that we discovered from doing it on the radio which we knew were wrong, which had to be changed.
Audrey Forbes Hamilton and her school friend Marjorie stayed as they were on the radio. But in the transfer to television, her Pekingese became a beagle called Bertie, supporting characters were added, and the new Lord of the Manor changed from the rich American Matthias Beauregard to dashing Czech-born millionaire Richard de Vere. All the changes were made, and the Manor was now ready to open its doors to the public.
One of the problems that all sitcoms have is a good first episode that grabs the audience.
Do you know where I could find Mr. Forbes Hamilton?
He'll be here any moment now.
Oh, good. I'd like a word.
So I doubt if you'll get much out of him. Here he comes now.
I suppose that's what I found a bit startling, first of all, when I read To the Manor Born, the fact that she was so happy. And no one ever questioned that.
Nobody looking, is there? No? Right. Here goes.
It was a marvellous way of starting, and I think it made people think, what can this be about?
I can't pretend that Martin pegging out like that wasn't the most wonderful thing that's ever happened. Just think, the Grantley estate, all mine now. All I ever wanted. It's too good to be true. Oh, dear, have I shocked you?
Well, I must say I am a little bit taken aback. I mean, I knew that you and Martin didn't always get on.
Well, we do now.
With her own series at last, Penelope Keith was the queen of all she surveyed.
She's statuesque, she's beautiful, she's sexy, and she looks as though she comes from the top drawer. She talks as though she comes from the top drawer, and she lent it a kind of authority that very few other actresses could have done.
Squat! Prepare the dump tables! Over there!
You will dump them nowhere. You will put them over there.
Mom!
Quietly.
What Penny has is that wonderful, natural, imperious class thing.
Audrey's class naturally told when it came to scoring first blood over her future sparring partner.
This is Mr. De Vere.
Oh, how do you do?
My condolences, Mrs. Forbes Hamilton.
How kind. It was a great shock, but life must go on. Do help yourself to a drink.
It's Mr. De Vere of Cavendish Foods.
Oh, the caterers. In that case, help everyone else to a drink.
He was about 6'2" with a moustache, and he had more hair than I do now.
I'd seen Peter operate in the West End. I'd seen him do some very good things. I liked he had great style, and he had presence.
One of Peter Bowles' first television roles was as a policeman in Out of the Unknown. From there, he graduated to several parts in The Avengers and was able to prove his early advisors wrong.
They took me around all the big casting people. They were very nice to me. They always gave me a sherry and a dry biscuit. I don't think they do that now.
Ah.
They all said, because of your colouring, you should go away and learn Greek or Arabic or something.
Mr. Steed. Henry? Thank you.
Because you'll never play an Englishman.
Well, what do you make of us? A bit archaic, eh?
A variety of villains followed, from The Prisoner to The Persuaders, until Peter got the chance to work in a house full of comedy greats.
But you just don't like him. I don't know why. Well, for one thing, he calls me Ducky, that's why. If he calls me Ducky once more, I shall have him.
Hello, Ducky.
When I came on and said my first line, the place went wild, and they couldn't continue, which I was sorry about. They had to stop the recording.
It was my agent's fault. He kept me on the phone for hours, some tatty review. They want me to take my clothes off again. Full frontal's the lot.
Well, you wouldn't catch me taking my clothes off, I'll tell you.
You wait until you're asked, cheeky.
Holding his own in Rising Damp earned Peter his comedy spurs, but he could have won them on a different show.
Well, originally I was going to cast Peter Bowles in The Good Life as Jerry Ledbetter opposite Penelope. One of the problems that Penelope poses is she's quite a tall woman and needs a robust and tall man to play credibly opposite her. But Peter Bowles was doing a play at the Crucible Theatre and didn't want to do The Good Life.
I decided to do this play, a new play by Alan Ayckbourn. And when I arrived at rehearsals, there was Dickie Briers, who I was at RADA with, known since he was a young man. And he said, "Why aren't you doing The Good Life?" Oh, I said, "Do you know about it?" He said, "Yes, I do know about it. I'm doing it." I said, "Are you? But you're doing this play." And he said, "Yes, but they record it on Sundays." I said, "I didn't know that. Nobody told me." He said, "Oh, God, I think it's been cast now." And it had.
If Peter Bowles had taken the part of Penelope Keith's husband Jerry in The Good Life, then he could never have played De Vere in the will they, won't they storyline of To the Manor Born. Dashing rich foreigners seldom come from Surbiton, even in sitcom.
By tomorrow.
He was a Czechoslovakian immigrant, started as an East End barrow boy, done very well in this country, made a lot of money, ended up owning a supermarket chain. And at the same time, he'd learned to speak posh and passed himself off as a totally acceptable Englishman.
So he has new money burning a hole in his well-tailored pocket, and widowed Audrey has old money, meaning no money.
Sell Grantley? You're mad.
The creditors are insisting on it.
Have they no sense of history? We've been here through wars, plagues, floods, famine, and Labour governments.
Despite her reluctance, she's forced to sell her precious house at auction.
Sold to you, sir, if you'll just come up to the rostrum, sir.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You mean I don't live here anymore?
And guess who just happens to buy it?
With a bit of imagination, one could really make something of this place. Excuse me.
It was very clear from the beginning, in my mind, that one way or another, the possibility of a relationship between these two people should always be there.
Now, if you'll excuse me.
Do you have to go?
I have a great deal to do. But I won't say goodbye. Just au revoir.
Golly, what a man.
Yes, isn't he?
That is as far as I was prepared to go at that stage. Just plant the possibility that a relationship might develop between these two people.
Do you think he might be your Mr. Right?
I don't know about Mr. Right, but he could very well be Mr. Convenient.
There was a good turnout to bid Audrey Forbes Hamilton farewell and see her move all of 200 yards to the gatehouse, while Richard de Vere dons the tweeds as the new Master of Grantley. Helping Audrey settle into the lodge and keep an eye on the dreamboat up the drive was school chum Marjorie, played by Angela Thorne.
You don't mean you can see right into the manor?
Yes, of course. Why do you think I moved here? Audrey, I think that's dreadful. Can I have a look?
She provided an insight into the way that Audrey was planning things and was a useful plot device as well. Having said that, she was much more than that, in that she played the character brilliantly.
Angela Thorne had also spent some time at the Avengers Academy, but more significantly, she had appeared in The Good Life as an acquaintance of Margot's, a genuine toff. And she brought a touch of class to Emmerdale Farm as Charlotte Verney.
They don't use front doors on farms.
How do you know?
Well, there were farms on Daddy's estate. Front doors were only used for feast days and funerals.
I'm a cow.
Yes, Angela was clearly a girl who knew just what was what about our country ways.
Oh, come on, Lord, noblesse oblige.
Oh, very well, Marjorie.
Marjorie was based on an aunt of mine, and Angela tells me that, in fact, she based it on an aunt of hers, so they must have been the same aunt.
Like Penelope, Peter and Angela, the rector, played by Gerald Sim, cut his TV teeth on The Avengers.
There are two occasions in a man's life when he shouldn't speculate. When he can afford it, and when he can't.
Thanks for the advice.
It's not mine, Mark Twain's.
I enjoyed playing you very much.
Oh, thank you for seeing to the clock, Ned.
There was a certain sense of pleasure in the rector when anything went wrong for Audrey. And I don't know why, they weren't exactly antagonistic, but I think he had a secret smile when the lady of the manor was taken down a peg of it when something went wrong.
What's happened?
There's always one on the morning the clocks go forward.
He had that character he developed for the part of being oily and yet sanctimonious at the same time. He was just fantastic.
The clocks go forward, did you say?
Well, ours did, thanks to Ned.
The fantastic English countryside around the manor played no small part in the show's success.
It was a small little community, and it was really sort of bounded by the manor and around it. And I think people, therefore, could identify the various people in the various places. It was a village shop, and they knew what that was like. They knew where the church was and the rector, and it was all in their own minds anyway. It was just one compact little village.
But in reality, things weren't quite as they seemed.
The lodge is supposed to be in view of the house, but the lodge was 2 miles away. We made it work by having a movable pillar, which was stuck in a left frame when we were outside the lodge. And then the pillar was put on the truck, taken down to the house, and then the impression was given. You never ever saw the two buildings in the same shop, but you thought you did.
The house, which became home to the series, was at Cricket St Thomas in Dorset, then a wildlife safari park, and an inspirational and familiar setting for Peter Spence. It belonged to his father-in-law, and he got married there, which was nice.
I lived on an adjoining farm for about 3 years, where I was able to sort of view the activities in a local community that kind of centres on a big house, and where all the material came from.
Peter's country cred gave the support characters authenticity. It became an every Sunday story of country folk.
They all added immeasurably because they were not stereotypical, but jolly nearly stereotypical of the characters that we expect to find in the country.
Michael Bilton played the outdoor man.
Ned, isn't it?
That's right, sir. Been Ned as long as I can remember. First it was young Ned, then it was just Ned. Now it's old Ned.
Daphne Hurd played De Vere's mother, old Mrs. Puluvishka, known to all as Mrs. Pooh.
Bedrich is my son.
Who's Bedrich?
Mr. De Vere.
But your name is Pulu something.
Puluvitska.
Her function was to remind you about what was not wrong with his background, but what was perhaps unsuitable for his background as a partner for Audrey.
Mrs. Pooh had a turn of phrase, too.
We have a saying in old Czechoslovakia that the teapot that is left longest grows coldest.
Well, the chimney's open. I wonder if it should be swept.
Audrey's faithful put-upon butler was John Rudling.
When I saw the part of Brabinger, I thought immediately of John. Had terrible trouble getting in touch with him because he'd never had an agent and he'd never had his photograph in Spotlight.
Oh, Brabinger, I can't find the bell anywhere.
But it's here, madam. You rang, madam?
I've often said to young actors, if you want to see someone really play a butler properly, he was absolutely wonderful.
I think one of the nice things about the whole series was that all the characters were pleasant people. There were no villains about at all.
Oh, Richard.
To the Manor-born's charm and setting in a fondly imagined England brought it wide international success.
Richard, this is magical.
I know a lot of people in America, the letters I had, thought that was what life in England was like.
People find the English quite fascinating. Being a Welshman, I don't share this view, but they do. And the Japanese love the English. They can't understand the English, but they watch To the Manor Born with absolute delight.
Patches of foie gras. You can get absolutely everything.
I think we have already, madam.
Don't worry, Brabinger. Mr. De Vere or the bank are going to pay for this, so we may as well enjoy ourselves.
Audiences loved seeing this very English lady in the real world, burdened by things like buying bog roll.
You should take a job. I've got the local paper here.
I'm not trained for anything in the local paper. The only job I'm trained for is the one I can't do.
Running the Grantley estate.
Exactly.
With no job, Audrey had to get busy.
You clever bees.
Her economies even included a brush with the National Health Service.
Don't be shy. No one will recognise you here. Hello, Mrs. Forbes Hamilton.
And having to take a holiday at home.
Se ha parado.
Una junta universal.
I just said that, you silly man. So often with situation comedy, you want to know what happens, but you want to know really what's going to make you laugh that week. Whereas in this comedy, there was a story. You wanted to know how Audrey would get on. So there wasn't only the comedy, there was the fact that they were telling a story as well, and I think that was the great secret.
But the strongest element, of course, was the love story, which built slowly and got stronger and stronger throughout the series.
If I had a magic wand, Cinders, I could still take you to the ball. It isn't midnight yet.
I've thought of myself as cinders before. Might be rather fun. Wave your magic wand, fairy godmother.
Abracadabra. Oh, you look breathtaking.
Thank you.
Couldn't I turn into your Prince Charming?
Perhaps.
She wanted to be back in the manor and wanted all the money which he had to offer her. He wanted the social connections and somebody to run the manor and the locality. It make perfect sense that this should happen.
Would you like to come in for a nightcap?
Sorry, I've got to get back. I promised Canada I'd ring them as soon as this racket died down. I'm having trouble with my tinned salmon.
Well, we mustn't stand in the way of your haute cuisine.
Good night, Audrey.
Every episode of To the Manor Born was apparently about something different. In fact, every episode was exactly the same.
Whatever the issue, Audrey and Richard took opposing sides, tried to outdo the other, and came to a smouldering truce, which edged them slightly closer together.
Well, now they're building a comprehensive. They're closing down the village school. I'm buying that.
What? Our lovely old schools? With countless
Thought you'd be pleased.
What was interesting about it was the physical attraction between the two permeated through their disagreements. So when they ever had a row, instinctively that they fancied each other. And that made the row more interesting.
Oh, what a shame. Yours must have got caught up in something.
What do you mean mine? It's yours that didn't come through. I won.
No, you haven't. That's my boo stick.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Typical. Not only do you miss church and fail in all your other duties, but you cheat at poo sticks. I will not cheat.
Arguments and spats and wars and conflicts and, people not getting on is much easier to write, or I'm more comfortable writing it, than where people are getting on, where they're having nice, tender moments.
I forgive you. Pax Britannica.
Pax Bratislavica.
They may have been past their sell-by date as far as the youth market was concerned, but love is a very strong magnet, and anybody having a romance on television, whatever age, becomes interesting.
I found Penny very attractive and lovely to work with, and we got on terribly well, and there was a chemistry between us, I think. Not that Roddy would notice, of course, a husband.
Well, you see, Audrey... Oh, may I call you Audrey? After all, we've known each other quite a while.
Yes, we have.
And perhaps you'd call me Richard.
Perhaps.
It's something you can't cast for. You hope it happens. And it certainly did. We got on terribly well. And he played him, Richard, wonderfully. He had this enormous, again, self-assurance. But I think vulnerability, too. And it worked like a treat. It really did.
You're really rather attractive when you're angry.
I remember by the time the third series happened, Gareth saying to me, well, they want a fourth. And I said, no. I said, this is a love story. I said, we've either got to get together or split. I said, we can't go on teasing the public any longer.
It had to have a full stop. And also, there was a danger, as in all things, that a series would go on for too long and become jaded, and people would get bored with the concept of will they, won't they.
This relationship had to happen, and indeed Penny and the people at the BBC who were following the progress of it and were listening to viewers' reactions and so on, saying this relationship must now start developing, must start getting warmer.
I think quite understandably Peter was not wholly convinced that was the way he wanted it to go. He didn't have an absolute alternative because I think at the back of his mind he didn't really want to see it come to an end.
So now, as the third series drew to a close, an ending to the whole story was needed. The simplest option was for Audrey to marry De Vere and be back in the manor. Audrey, however, may have been on her uppers, but she still had her principles.
Oh, I couldn't marry him, even if he asked me.
I thought he was supposed to be your Mr. Right.
And he shouldn't be expected to marry a pauper. I have my pride.
You couldn't believe that Audrey Forbes Hamilton could go on living on air. Couldn't believe that, because we all know you can't.
So the beginning of the end comes as De Vere's business collapses and he's forced to think about leaving the manor and downsizing.
We need you here.
I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
So Grantley Manor was up for auction again. Who would buy?
At £990,000 for the third time, sold to you, sir. May I have your name, please, sir?
Mrs. Forbes Hamilton.
Audrey, why didn't you tell me?
Oh, so you are back where you belong.
All thanks to her rich uncle dying and leaving her his fortune.
Imagine that. Audrey back at the manor.
Across the country, newspaper speculation was intense. How would it all end? What would happen to Audrey and Richard? Could they stay together? Surely those BBC bosses wouldn't allow Richard to disappear back into the world of trade, or even to Czechoslovakia.
Come along, Marjorie, cheer up.
I'm sorry. It just won't be the same when you've gone. Oh, gosh.
Interest in the conclusion of the story was so high that the producers even took steps to prevent leaks to the press from the last ever studio recording.
We made the decision that we would swear the audience to secrecy, Because I just thought it would be nice for the audience, who are, after all, the licence payers who had actually paid for the programme, to be the first people to actually see it, rather than to see clips of it or read about it in a newspaper.
With excitement at fever pitch with the secrecy surrounding the final episode, a record number of viewers tuned in to see if their dreams had come true.
Richard! Oh, I'm so glad you could come.
You look absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
I remember the very final episode. We cleared the place of photographers. We had a closed set.
There were over 55% of the population watching it. There had to be, because there was, in excess of 27 million viewers.
After 21 episodes of Will They, Won't They, the waiting was over.
Audrey, what would you say if I told you I was thinking of chucking the business?
Oh. I think I'd say something like, why don't you come back here and marry me?
You see, what was that last bit?
Marry me.
Do you mean that?
I never say things I don't mean.
I didn't think you'd want me without the manor.
I wouldn't have married you with the manor.
But now it's all right.
Yes, because I've got the manor.
Peter Spence didn't want to write the last episode because he didn't want them to get married. So I asked Christopher Bond, who'd worked on the entire series anyway, to write the last episodes because he knew all the characters. He was a fine writer himself. And Peter and I had a big battle, which we resolved afterwards.
The audience had the ending they wanted, even if the writer didn't. So, fast forward, no messing about, to the big day itself.
I remember standing on that wonderful big staircase. The whole cast was there. And I turned to Angela and I said, Angie, let's enjoy this. This is the last time we're going to be the youngest people in a television studio. And it was.
Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom. The bride and groom.
My one regret is when we stopped it is that I was left with a notebook full of ideas and lines and possibilities of things that I knew that I was never going to use.
Yes, viewers, she married him, and so the story ended. Peter Spence closed the Grantley Manor Visitors book and went on to write for Hunter Davis's series Father's Day, and a formidable pair of ladies, Patricia Routledge and Patricia Hayes.
What's this? Last waltz to rupture? Last waltz to rapture. Oh, yes. Same difference at your age. Just be careful.
It was astonishing after To the Manor Born. There was an assumption made about me as a writer, was that I was the man who wrote about the upper classes, and for some reason that I could write for women. The result of that was that I got invitations out to lunch with some famous, glamorous women who wanted me to write for them on the understanding that I had some kind of inside knowledge as to how women's minds ticked. I have absolutely no idea at all.
After To the Manor Born, Angela Thorne got tough, impersonating Mrs. Thatcher on the West End stage in Anyone for Dennis?
Obviously, I don't give a damn about election pledges, but I am rather committed to the idea of no U-turns.
You'll know who's who, because she's much younger and much prettier than I am, and much slimmer.
If you ever lay your bloody paw...
And she put the up into 3 up, 2 down.
If you want some reading matter of a morning, I suggest you make your own arrangements. I'm sure the newsagent would be only too pleased to deliver the Beano.
All during To the Manor Born, Peter Bowles was 3-timing the viewers, as well as being De Vere in the Manor. He was Guthrie Featherstone with Rumpole, and on the ward as Archie Glover.
It had a very strong fan base with young people, 7 or 8, 9, 10.
Hello, son.
Don't call me that.
And so these fully grown men often say, you were in HAPPY. They very often call it that. Oh, I love that programme.
Oh, do stop raving on, you ridiculous old man.
I remember the producer coming in saying, look, we've beaten Coronation Street, we're #1.
Everyone knows my name around here.
In 1983, Penelope Keith and Gareth Gwenlyn worked together again on Sweet 16. and then Penelope went on to another John Howard Davis hit, Executive Stress, starring alongside Geoffrey Palmer.
I did a first series with Geoffrey, and then we came to the second series, and Geoffrey was working and couldn't do it.
And she thought they were going to cancel the series. And I said, I'll do it.
It's nice to have you back.
It was very, very different because, A, we were totally different people. We were both in business. And we were married as opposed to courting. That's a sweet old-fashioned word.
But without the frisson of uncertainty, the viewing figures for Penny and Peter's marriage weren't as big as they had been for their romance. Gareth Gwenlyn cast Penelope Keith as a grandmother in Next of Kin, and in the 1990s oversaw Only Fools and Horses, which replaced To the Manor Born as the most-watched sitcom ever. And now he's back in the countryside with Boise in Green, Green Grass. Penelope Keith has most recently been on the run with June Brown in the comedy drama Marjorie and Gladys, while Peter Bowles has reverted to villainy in Jericho, delighting himself and the ever-discerning London cabbies.
Is this a raid?
I'm getting taxi drivers now saying, cool, blimey, so I didn't know you could do that. Oh, God, that was good. You know, I thought you only played posh parts.
Piss off.
And Peter Spence is now writing for ITV's Rosemary and Thyme. But 20 years after the original idea, he was finally to see To the Manor Born made for radio as originally planned. The cast included Penelope Keith and Angela Thorne, with Keith Barron in the role of De Vere. The Manor is now a hotel, but for many millions of viewers it will always be not only Audrey's rightful home, but also home to sitcom's most romantic cliffhanger.
It's a feeling of womanhood.
Well, if that's how you feel, I'm surprised you can get up in the morning. That dog has a highly developed critical sense.
It did look back with warmth and nostalgia to another era, and I think it took a lot of people with it who were happy to watch it. I don't think they'd want to go back there.
I'm very surprised and very flattered indeed that after 25 years or so that people still remember it.
I was pleased all the way through. I had a big grin on my face all the time. I mean, it was wonderful. It changed my life.
I think it will look very nice over there.
Yes, just over here.
I remember reading one day about the enormous viewing figures. I think it was something like 27 or 28 million. And I thought, gosh, what does that mean?
Finish! It's on! Quick, sit on! Hurry, be quiet!
There are some things. I know what it means. It means every other person in the country was watching this programme.
How much is this toilet roll pack?
Which size?
Special offer, jumbo size.
I look back on To the Manor Born with lots of affection. I was delighted for Gareth and Penny and Peter and everybody connected with the programme. But I was also delighted for myself because I was responsible for it, so I was able to bask in their reflected glory.
It's all been most enjoyable.